everyone, it's Elizabeth here, and I wanted to come on to the video today to say happy May the 25th. It's GDPR Day and we made it. So if you've been working in any kind of business recently, I expect you will have been well aware of what is happening with the general data protection regulations across Europe and more broadly across the world for the impact that they have on international companies holding data for EU citizens. But compliance is only the start of the journey. Okay, great, your company is probably now GDPR compliant, or at least on the journey to handling personal data in a very secure way. But what does that mean for the projects that start next week, the projects that start next year? We have to build data protection into everything we do in a way perhaps than we previously have done. So for us as project managers, the implications for GDPR don't stop today, in fact they start. Because now we've got to start thinking about how do we make sure that data protection, data security is a fundamental part of every project that we manage. So well done you if you're involved in a project to get your business to a compliant state. And now let's think about the future. So I wanted to talk today a bit about the types of considerations we need to be looking at and taking into account for projects that have the projects that use data, which is pretty much all our projects, right? There's very little that we do that I imagine doesn't have some kind of data involved. So what does the data protection considerations look like? What does it mean for us as project managers? So I'm going to talk a bit about the types of projects that might be affected, data privacy impact assessments, what that means for your projects and whether you need to do one, who you need to get involved, because our stakeholder group is wider now than perhaps it used to be. Retention periods for data and just good housekeeping, good data protection and building in privacy by design. So right to portability, data subject rights around erasure and making sure that we've got software that is accessible as well so that we're building data protection into software solutions that we're delivering. Okay? Hello if you've just joined and you're watching live. So what types of projects will be affected by data protection, in particular the new stringent GDPR perspectives? Well, we have a huge range of projects that use personal data, but if you can think about some examples, if you're building a website and you have opt-in forms, or you have any kind of online service that you're providing to customers where you are collecting their data and their information, their payment information, so they're buying something online, be that goods or services. Any kind of project that is involving research where you're collecting personal data or sensitive data from people. Anything that has an element of marketing or where you want to reach out to people and have their personal data online or not online, collected on paper forms, that counts too. So there's a big element of data and personal data. It has to relate to a living individual, and if your project involves data or will collect data from living individuals, then data protection needs to be a fundamental part of your project as you start to plan it from the beginning. When you're starting to think about your project, you need to perhaps consider doing a data privacy impact assessment. This is basically a risk assessment. What the project wants to do and what you think that might become, what that might mean from a data protection perspective. So it's like the scope, the context, the purpose of processing data on the project, whether it's necessary to process or whether there are alternative ways where you can deliver the same stuff and get the same end result, but without having the data. It looks at what compliance means and what measures you're going to put in place to keep that data safe. We'll talk about the risks to individuals. So what is the risk to them that you have their data and you're using it in this way for this project? And it will talk about what you can put in place to mitigate those risks. So your data security measures and making sure that you password protect things, people don't have access to data that they're not entitled to see, and things like that. So data protection impact, data privacy impact assessments are just a way of asking yourself the right questions at the beginning of a project so that you can then build your project and plan it out, taking data protection into account from the very beginning. The ICO has a data protection impact assessment template, and you'll have a version that they choose to use themselves. And I think we'll see more companies starting to put DPIAs into business cases so that at the point that you're trying to work out whether or not you should go ahead with the project, you've also done a privacy impact assessment and you understand the data protection risks. so that when you're then going to solution design, you can take that into account and really build it from the beginning. Okay, so some examples of projects where you would need DPIAs. Let me think. If you, well, any kind of new software build, or you're starting to use a new software tool, anything where you're transferring personal data between yourselves and a third-party supplier, so perhaps you're outsourcing something. Other things like if you're installing new CCTV around your restaurant, that is personal data because CCTV captures images of people, and you'd need to perhaps analyse what the risks of having that data would be. So that's the kind of project that would need a data privacy impact assessment going forward. So are our stakeholders different now we have data protection front of mind? And I think yes, they are. We now need to consult with the data protection officer, if your company has one, and probably more conversations with information governance managers, information security teams, infrastructure teams to make sure they're fully aware of what you're doing and the fact that whatever it is you're building, if you're building a technology project, that it falls in the right kind of infrastructure for security. So I think it is worth, as project managers, taking a look at the stakeholders we're getting involved on projects and making sure we're including everybody. Okay, so moving on to solution design. So we've done some thinking in the beginning of the project about what data protection implications the project might have. So now you're coming on to design your solution. You have to build in privacy from the outset. So you need to think about data subjects, that's the people, individuals, and what they might need, and also how you're going to keep them safe, and how you're going to be able to fulfill their requirements in the future. GDPR has given us new regulations, new requirements, and enhanced rights for people. So, for example, you may well find that in 6 months' time, people are coming to you saying, I want to be forgotten. I want my data to be erased from your software and your records. I want copies of everything you have about me so that I can take them to another provider. Everything I've provided to you, I want you to give it back to me because I'm going to start shopping with somebody else. And they might want copies of everything that you hold on them. They might make a formal subject access request. So when we're designing solutions that involve personal data, and this could be anything from putting new filing cabinets into an office through to a fully all singing, all dancing enterprise resource management software tool, we need to think about how we're going to get the data out, how we're going to fulfill data subject rights and make sure that we can delete people if that is, give people copies of their data if that's required, make sure that we can restrict processing of their data if that's required. And so you can't just go ahead and say, yep, that's fine, I'll just build it. You need to be asking yourself these questions about whether the tools that you're using, the frameworks that you're putting in place, the filing cabinets that you're putting in your new office, do they have locks? Are they secure? All this kind of stuff matters now. And it actually has mattered for some time, but is now codified in a much more explicit way. And of course, because of around GDPR, we're all much more aware of our rights and our responsibilities. So finally, I wanted to talk about retention periods, because this is a biggie for electronic data. And I know in a lot of technology projects, I don't naturally think about how long I'm going to keep the data in the software for, but I think it's something that as project managers, we really need to take into account. Most of our projects generate huge volumes of data, and because of that, we have to store it in a way that is safe, secure, and all that, but also we have to delete it when we don't need it anymore. So your company should have a retention period around how long they keep data for, and we need to make sure that any solutions we're putting in place, any operational processes, any business change, any policies that we're designing, any IT that we're putting in, all of that fits with our company's retention periods. And that applies to everything from candidate CVs of people who might apply for a contract job on the project and don't get it, or within HR, through to keeping records of customers for how many years you need to keep them. Oh, excuse me, I think I'm going to sneeze. No, that wasn't a sneeze. Sorry about that. So retention periods need to be built into our data infrastructures, architecture, the solutions that we're building, and we have to educate people as well about what that means, how they need to delete data, what's going to happen when that data is deleted after 7 years, for example. And make sure that that is part of our handover to the operational teams, that they're aware that we've taken these data protection considerations into account when we put the project together, when we've delivered our solutions, and that they know what they're inheriting, what they're taking on, and how to make it work in the framework of data protection. So I hope that's been useful. I've talked about the types of projects where data protection needs to be a consideration, although that was not an exhaustive list. And I've talked about data privacy impact assessments, which I think you need to be looking at for your projects, and perhaps as a PMO, if you're in a PMO capacity, think about how do you build that into your project assessments that you do at the beginning before you say yes to a project. And I've talked about stakeholders, who to get involved, and then some of the aspects of privacy by design. So making sure you're building in data subject rights and what they need, and also making sure that whatever solutions you are implementing fit within your organisational framework of retention periods and how long you can keep the data for. There's protection that you probably need to consider on projects, perhaps that you didn't think about previously, and it's actually not that difficult when you start thinking about it. So if we're asking ourselves the right questions, we can make sure that we're keeping all kinds of data safe and secure and operating within the law. I hope that's been helpful. I should say that I'm not a lawyer, and this is just my own research and my own interpretation of the millions of pages of guidance that I have read and the hours I've spent poring over GDPR in the last few months. But that is what your data protection officer is there for. So you'll have somebody on staff, information governance, information security, risk manager, data protection officer. Those kind of roles can really help you in your project management work to make sure that you're delivering a project that's fit for purpose. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in my next video. Goodbye.